This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's our pleasure to have with us once again tonight Dr. Buck Melton.
Glad to be here as always.
Welcome, Buck. Well, we've talked about a lot of things at our interchanges, but maybe we could talk a little bit tonight about what is politically correct and why is that becoming such a dominant theme in the country? I mean, the origin of the phrase is relatively new, isn't it?
Yes, the political correctness as a movement is only about 30 to 40 years old. I think you can find examples of the same general type of thought throughout history. And the basic idea is if you control the language, you control the concept. If you control the concept, you control the reality. And I think it's very interesting that political correctness did not start in political science departments. It started in university and college English departments, which of course specialize in language. And that's what political correctness is about. It's about controlling the language.
Well, that's a big deal. It's control is in there. Is that right? So it's kind of a brave new world, thought police. So there's some words that you could not use and some words you have to use. And when a new word is used, it really changes the meaning of a concept. So it's almost like that concept kind of no longer exists.
Yes.
It's gone. It's a forbidden thought. It's sort of a little bit like thought police, isn't it?
Yes. And of course, language is always changing. It's always modifying. And sometimes a change in terms does make us look at our preconceptions. For instance, when I was coming along, and probably when you were coming along in America, and when we study American history, one of the many wars that we study was called the Mexican War.
Yes.
And that was the war between the United States and Mexico in the 1840s.
Wait, it's not still called that?
No, you have been seeing a tendency to move it towards the Mexican-American War.
Really?
And so the idea is that is less United States centric, if you will.
Yes.
It's a more neutral, more objective look at the conflict. Whereas just Mexican War, it's understood that this is the war as seen from the United States perspective.
Well, this is kind of a censorship, isn't it? So how is this censorship enforced? I mean, how is it that we've gotten into a world where politically correct thought, sort of little thought police, and if one uses the wrong word, one is pillared. For instance, calling the Mexican War, that's a real bad thing, and I think using the word Oriental is very bad, and the correct word is Asian. Can we parse that out? I mean, to me, there's no malice intended in any of those phrases. It was the sort of imprinting of an earlier time.
Yes.
Can we parse that out? What is the difference between Oriental, which I think is a good French word of French origin, and Asian, which is, in some ways, you could say Asia might mean Siberia.
Yes.
And so it has it's a different deal. So an Oriental person would mean somebody, I guess you'd say, that was not Caucasian and not an African person, but an Asian demarcation would just mean a huge geographical area with lots and lots of different people there.
Yes.
And thus a bit less precise. Any comments?
Well, I'm not an adherent of political correctness.
Oh, really?
I do see it as kind of oppressive. But I can actually put myself into the mind of someone who likes political correctness with rather alarming ease. It's sort of like C.S. Lewis when he wrote the Screwtape Letters. He said it's too easy for him to write from the perspective of a demon. He called it uncomfortable. But if you ask me to say why Oriental would be problematic, I can think of two reasons. Number one, just the cultural baggage that went with it, that Since it was a word that happened to be used by Westerners during a time of Western imperialism, we have to show that the time of Western imperialism is over by expunging terminology that the imperialists used. If you want me to get a little bit more specific, a second reason for it would be, well, Oriental means the Orient. It means east.
Yes.
And it is east of what? Well, it's east of the center of culture and technology and politics and learning that is Western Europe. So by saying you're in the east, it's a demeaning concept, whereas Asian is a more geographically neutral concept.
Well, that's an interesting. Let's bounce that basketball a little bit. So in a way, what we're seeing is kind of a redistribution of cultural wealth, if you want to say it that way. So the idea that there's some kind of hierarchy of culture and,
Yes.
And indeed of ethnicity. The idea is though if you use a particular word, then although you use it in an innocent fashion, because that's the way it's just the word that comes to your mind when you describe an object, there's no malice attached to it, but another person's sensitivities have been injured because the word takes them back to another generation, and ergo the word is discarded.
Well, maybe not even that so much as the fact that the unconscious assumptions that you yourself have never questioned that go along with the word. For instance, let's take disabled.
Yes.
Perfectly good word, you've used it, I've used it, we mean nothing by it. But consider the politically correct alternative, differently abled. Mm-hmm. Because disabled would set, once again, a normal person who is in full command of his faculties and his physical body as the standard, as the norm, and anyone else as failing to come up to that norm. It's a judgment call to call someone disabled, that there is somewhere in the background there the belief, the idea, the assumption that the disabled person is something less than he should be or could be.
So this is pretty interesting. I mean, I think if in a way, if we think about the purpose of language, so the language is communication. So if there's some kind of thought police out there that basically are stopping or abridging communication, I mean, that really often interferes with coming to the truth, if you want to say it that way. Yeah. And so if a person in trying to discuss a certain issue is constantly has to put blank out words and put another word in, the process becomes so awkward that it really becomes almost impossible to communicate. So if you're a politician or a public figure and you're attempting to discuss anything, you have to be, their thought police are there to make sure that you're up to speed on non-offensive words. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, but I think we need to talk about who these thought police are.
Just so.
Yes.
Aha! At least you're swinging the bat. Okay, you've elected to swing the bat. Okay.
Yes. That what you're seeing here, or at least so far in the history of political correctness, it's not government censorship. It's what I would call social censorship. And in this regard, political correctness is fully cognizant of the fact that while the First Amendment protects a great many unpopular opinions, unpopular statements, unpopular words, that coexisting with that First Amendment is the idea of social pressure, of peer pressure, that if I say something, the First Amendment may protect my right to say it, but I may find myself ostracized by the community for availing myself of my right to say that thing. So the thought police in political correctness originally started out as university faculty, and they are trying to influence the wider society, social mores, social ideas, so that society itself will serve as the thought police rather than the government.
Well, that's a pretty good, I guess, dissertation. If we consider these thought police, they're sort of self-appointed, are they not? And the idea is that there are a couple of ideas that I think are attached to this. One is the Matthew Arnold notion of a gentleman, that a gentleman does not give offense.
Yes.
So if you would be, if you're a person of gentility and courtesy and high moral demeanor, the last thing you'd want to do is to offend someone. So it's a very, many people hold themselves out to be gentlefolk, and one would expect in positions of power and influence, of anybody that's flying the airplane, so to speak, would be a genteel person. So that's a pretty, if people say, I've been grievously offended here, then that would be one thing. But are people really so offended? I mean, if they're said to be disabled. In fact, the forms in my office that I fill out, I mean, you want your disability form? Yes, and I don't see any notion of offense in when people apply for disability. I've never heard, in my whole career, I've never heard a person say, well, I've been insulted by that term, I feel offended by it. So could a gentleman say to a person, unfortunately, you have a component of disability? Is that a genteel thing to do, or is there an arbitrator that's stepping into this interchange between, say, a physician and a patient and saying, I believe this person has taken offense to that, and I'm the person that can interpret.
Yes.
I'm the interpreter of the sensitivities of this particular group, and the only way that you can pass muster is that if there's only one judge on this issue, and that's the thought police, not the people that are involved in this communication, but the arbitrators of whether the person is being offended or not, and they're self-appointed, are they not?
Yes. Well, this brings up an interesting point that within this movement, there might be, or in some branches of this movement, there certainly are notions of paternalism, that you don't know any better, so we have to step in and defend your rights and your sensibilities for you. I just read the other day that there's a Christmas card going on, and I think the family's holding up a sign that says "Peace on Earth."
Yes.
And the women the women of the family have their mouths duct taped, and the husband and father and the son are sort of doing a yes kind of symbol or gesture in the picture. And many people have become infuriated by the anti-feminist statements here.
Yes.
And on the other hand, these women who were in the picture voluntarily did this. They were in on it.
They were joking. It was a joke, apparently.
Yes. So you could look at it one of two ways. Number one, that you respect their decision to do this and engage in this and be part of this prank, and to assume that they do see it as a prank. And on the other hand, to step in and be paternalistic, which may not be the right word for a feminist movement, but to say these women have been co-opted by the patriarchy and they don't realize that they are being used as a tool of the patriarchy. Maybe even they think that they are in on the joke and it's part of a joke. But they are perpetuating injury, and we, as the priestesses or the arbiters, must prevent this from happening for their own good.
Now, I think we're onto an interesting subject here, and I don't think people talk about it much, other than to just use the word. But then it's not parsed out too much. Maybe one of the things going on is the idea that political correctness is necessary. Is the extraordinary social demographic changes that are taking place in the country. So tremendous changes. If you look at the United States, say 50 years ago, the ethnicity, the culture, everything was, I guess, pretty stable and had an origin in Western Europe. And since that time, there's an enormous assault against this. And in order to, I guess, allow non-offensive social intercourse, these terms are being invented with the idea that the older worldview is gone, is passé, and that we have a new set of realities here.
Yes. Well, I mean, to chase that a little bit, I read of something that's recently happened, that someone, in light of all of the debates and more than debates, confrontations, I should say, going on in some college campuses these days, Mizzou and Yale. Someone went to Princeton with a gag petition to repeal the First Amendment, and apparently many undergraduates happily signed that petition in favor of repealing the First Amendment. Yes, And it makes you think that the United States, it's not just principally European or has been principally European up to this point. It's also been very heavily, our entire existence as a nation, as a civilization, is based very heavily in Enlightenment thought. And part of Enlightenment thought is the idea of the marketplace of ideas, the classical liberal philosophy of opposition to, well, as Thomas Jefferson said once, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against all forms of tyranny over the mind of man." And this is where America's coming from. But what we are seeing now with the political correctness movement is perhaps a rising sentiment that the Enlightenment itself is passé, that it's not good. And so this means that political correctness is really directly attacking the underpinnings of what we have traditionally understood America to be.
Oh, well, all right. Let's bounce that basketball a little bit, to use another sporting analogy here. The idea of free speech and free communication is part of our culture. And so if a person attempts to communicate and say something, then presumably that's okay unless they blunder into something called hate speech. So to really be punished with not being politically correct, I mean, so it could well be said that you're inciting hatred. And once again, the arbitrators of whatever they're saying this is hatred. Thus, it is impossible to, if that's the situation, if in trying to communicate ideas, and the perpetrator of the idea is attempting to put the idea across, many people would judge in the most neutral way possible. Just trying to say, this is what I think. And the person that's listening to this says, I'm not going to allow you to think that, because your thought process depends on words that I think have to be expunged from your brain. What we're really getting into is a lot of double think.
Yes.
I mean, we're really getting into which gets back, it's sort of it's a tyranny. You mentioned Thomas Jefferson, so we're getting into a sense of tyranny and abridgment of free speech. And the idea that on university campuses, I mean, if someone attempted to present an idea, a valid idea, and the person was attempting to present that in the most neutral way the person knew how to do, and that person blundered by using a non-fashionable word innocently, then the person would be guillotined on the spot. I mean, it's really, it's sort of a terrible set of circumstances, in my opinion.
Yes. Well, and once again, hate speech is a concept that once again started in the universities, and it started about the same time as political correctness. And it's something new to the law. It's something that so far the law doesn't really like. There are similar concepts that have found more support in the law. For instance, fighting words. If I say something to you that is not really designed to be part of the marketplace of ideas, it's not designed to be part of a mutual discovery of the truth, but simply designed to cause such an extreme degree of offense that you are likely to throw a punch, then that's fighting words, and that can, in fact, be limited. Whereas hate speech, it doesn't have that element of incitement to it. That if I say something to you that will simply hurt your feelings, even though it might not rise to the level of making you start a fight with me, well, then we can't allow me to say that. The idea of the microaggression, the idea of the eggshell victim who is so sensitive that he cannot even stand to hear the words. Well, this is what it flies in the
now,
face of the Enlightenment.
If the summa bonum of social intercourse or any kind of intercourse is not giving offense, and the person that is the arbitrator is the person that says, I'm offended, then doesn't that empower that person to be sort of a dictator?
Yes.
The person becomes an easily offended person, becomes the dictator of all human interaction. So if the purpose of any kind of society is that any person that says they're offended, they can totally control the situation. They can be crowned emperor or empress. sit on the throne, and then listen to people discuss whatever they want to discuss or any kind of idea, any kind of concept, and say, I've been offended, off with your head. I mean, and so is the country headed in this direction? And I'm sort of trying to get into my point here. The fact that this has become such an excessive, I guess, evil, I'll use that word, an excessive evil, that not, and I'm parsing the words carefully, in excess it's evil. There's a level of, I guess, kindness and civility that I would say would be okay. I mean, you don't want to, if somebody obviously is, there are situations where politeness, what we would call politeness, should prevail. But is this the sort of thing that's empowering a person like Donald Trump? So it's a puzzling kind of phenomena. The person, and if we look at his career a bit, just out of the blue, he made very, to me, offensive remarks. They appear to be offensive and loutish, and he was pounded, and then did not apologize, and was lifted up by the throng of people saying, "This is our hero because you've stood up to the people that have been dominating our lives."
Yes. Well, I think there's probably some truth to that. That once again, this Enlightenment philosophy of the marketplace of ideas, that marketplace is an ugly place. I mean, and if you even look in terms of economics, back when the word bargain was a verb instead of a noun, it's hard hitting. There's negotiation, there's give, there's take, there's friction. So the idea of the marketplace of ideas, it's not supposed to be without pain. It's not supposed to be without struggle. As Milton said, whoever knew truth to be put to the worse in a free and open encounter. But that free and open encounter, it's going to be like a prize fight, and sometimes feathers get ruffled. That's part of the process. I think with Trump, what you're seeing is that I think that there has been a trend on college campuses in the mainstream media to try to steer public opinion left of center. And I think you're finally, with Trump, getting blowback on that you're seeing a great deal of frustration bubble up from society saying we're tired of this, and you're seeing a very strong counter reaction to it, which is probably going too far in the opposite direction. But I think that's the only way we can explain the Trump phenomenon, that you've had some repressed anger for some years about this new social concept of moving away from the open and free exchange of ideas.
Well, just so. I mean, I was trying to think of different parallels in history, in different cultures and different places. I was thinking about China a little bit, and the Great Leap Forward, and some of the Cultural Revolution, when people, they had the Little Red Book, and anyone that violated the tenets of the Little Red Book,
Yes.
where they were just stoned, really.
Yes, yes.
So people were so powerfully taken with one kind of ideology that anyone that strayed was literally destroyed.
Yes,
Is that a
yes.
fair thing?
It is, and also I think it's important to remember that the reason we have a First Amendment, the reason we have a freedom of expression, it's not to protect popular ideas, popular speech. It's not designed to protect expressions that don't upset people, because expressions or statements that don't upset people don't need protecting. Nobody's going to object to it. It is the expression that does upset someone, that does force someone to look at things in a new way, that may in fact need protection, because somebody's going to want to censor that. If you look at Banned Books Week at the library, which I think happens in February, March, if you look at the list of books, you are going to be horrified that some of those books have been banned. And you may be happy and ashamed of yourself that you're happy that other books had been banned. But everything from the Bible to Lolita to Huckleberry Finn, which, by the way, is now about to be thrown out because,
Really?
yes, there are some public school systems who have objected to Huckleberry Finn because it speaks in a denigrating way of persons of color. So, and of course, that's ironic because when Huckleberry Finn first came out, it was objected to because it elevated persons of color.
Hmm. Well, let's pursue this a little bit. So what we're getting into is thought police, and I'm reminded of the Nazi book burnings.
Yes.
Is there a difference between a person that is insisting on political correctness and a Nazi that throws a book in the fire? And I'm not totally joking about that. In other words, they're just viewpoints. Why did the people burn those books? They were offensive. And
Yes.
if somebody said a particular thing, or from a particular, any minority was sort of stoned, so to speak. That's an understatement.
Yes.
But so the Nazis were trying to purge the vast amount of Western thought there. This doesn't comport with our ideals. And is there a sort of an effort in that direction to basically stop every kind of contrary event out there? And is there such a difference between banning Huckleberry Finn or the Bible, as far as that go, and throwing them in the fire? And I think in some ways there's an intellectual crisis in the country
Yes.
that's not properly discussed.
Yes.
So I'm not sure I've heard people, as we're talking tonight, really sort of try and cut to the chase in regards to politically correct thought. I mean,
Yes.
what are your
Yes.
thoughts?
Well, I think, to go back to your initial question, I think that there is a big difference between the political correct person and the Nazi. That the Nazi does have the force of the government behind him. It's okay for you to be as politically correct as you want, as long as you do it on your time and not mine. That if I say something that offends you, for instance, here we are in TV land, if I say something right now to the TV audience that offends them, they are perfectly able to turn off the television or change the channel. If I write an editorial, which I often do, and they see something they don't like, they can throw the paper away. But if the government decides it doesn't like what I'm saying, and then it comes in and shuts down this TV station, or throws me in jail, that's ramping it up another level completely. So if you take offense, I am sorry, but you don't have to listen to me. But if you're the government and you take offense and you decide that no one's going to listen to me, then that's a different matter.
Well, okay. I mean, I'll accept there's a certain a degree that's there, and maybe we're not to the point of Nazi book burnings, but you could imagine if the situation continues as it's going, it would not be impossible. The thoughts that are banned, the use of words. There's a certain kind of word that must be used, and the empowerment over thought becomes pretty extraordinary, doesn't it?
Yes.
So and the sense of giving offense becomes so extraordinary. I mean, your normal sense of American freedom is diminished.
Yes.
So our notion of American freedom and political correctness, is there an antipathy between those? I mean, do you have a thought on that?
Yes, I think there is. I think that if the social prohibitions on unacceptable language ever get so strong that they can be enacted into law, which you do see with hate speech, campus speech codes, and even state legislation, so it's creeping up, then we've got a problem. And if it ever gets to the judiciary, so that you have Supreme Court appointees who see the First Amendment as a quaint object of yesteryear that now needs to be changed judicially, then I don't think we've got the same country that we have had for the last several hundred years.
Or, just to make the comment, I've heard this suggested in some pretty extreme circles, that because the Constitution was basically written by
dead white European men.
Ergo,
European
because
ancestry,
there was no input from the rest of the world,
Yes.
from different genders, sexual orientations, you name it, they didn't have a role in putting the Constitution together, that it's a non-legitimate document.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's been said.
Well, and I think this is where the difference comes down between objective truth and relativism. That I think in the Western tradition we would say that it doesn't matter who they were or what their genetic makeup was, but that they were purporting to set forth objective, absolute truth that relates to everyone. And I think that is an idea that is now very heavily under attack.
Well, Bucky, we've had an interesting conversation. Buck, we've had an interesting conversation tonight, and we'll talk some more.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.